criminals are to be guaranteed accommodation when they leave prison as part of a £20 million plan to reduce reoffending. They'll be housed in bedsits or hostels organised by the probation service in a bid to prevent them returning to crime. Some 18,000 prisoners were in unsettled accommodation, rough sleeping or homeless last year, with a 50% greater chance of reoffending than those who had secure housing. It's the first time ex-offenders will be been housed in this way in private sector accommodation. But will it work? Let's speak with Jonny Gilbert. Jonny is a former prisoner, now studying a PhD at Cardiff University. Afternoon to you, Jonny.
Afternoon, Ian. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Well, just if you don't mind, just sort of remind us how long you spent in the pen, as they might say.
Indeed. I went to prison in 2014 and I was released last year in June. So I spent 6 years of a 12-year prison sentence.
Wow.
I was a lawyer in a large banking fraud. So I was convicted at Southwark Crown Court in 2014. Okay. I pleaded guilty, so I knew I was going to jail. Myself and my wife and family weren't thinking it would be quite that length of sentence. But it was a long journey inside. But with that came opportunities. I had the opportunity then to think about what I wanted to do after prison. Initially I helped others around the prison because I had a law degree, so I worked in education, worked with the Shannon Trust on literacy and improving reading standards. And then I thought I need to do something myself. I need to help myself as well. So I did a master's in counter fraud and counter corruption with Portsmouth University, whilst in closed conditions, which then gave me the stepping stone that when I then progressed to an open prison, it allowed me greater opportunity. So I applied to Cardiff University. I'm working with Professor Mike Levy there, who's kind of the don of financial crime globally, really. So it's a nice little marriage, really, with our research.
Yeah. So this PhD is in what? What is it you're studying?
I'm doing the organisation and regulation of mortgage fraud in the UK. Wow. I was involved in mortgage fraud. Okay. I facilitated it for my client. There was other professional neighbours involved. So it was just a way in which perhaps a little bit of research can contribute.
Indeed. I mean, when you went to prison, it's interesting that there is, we have an idea of a type of person that goes to prison. And we know that, prison is full of reoffenders, people who've been there many times before. You would have seen all of this, people who can't read or write. You'd have seen all of that as well. People with horrendous backstories, addiction problem. I mean, the miserable list goes on. I know that Jonathan Aitken, you remember the former Conservative politician, when he went to jail, found himself as an educated man, sitting down teaching prisoners how to read, how to write letters back home, this kind of thing. He saw the sort of sense of hopelessness. We can all get Daily Mail, can't we, when we think of prisoners and the horrible oiks that are sitting there because they did terrible things. But there's a large percentage of people where there is no hope but, essentially reoffending again and going back.
That's right. I think as a society, we need to kind of consider what we want to do. Do we just want to punish people who offend? I offended and I deserve my punishment. But, it's the question, should I just, be unemployed and, just useless to society from here on in? Or is there a place for me? And I think that's the message that, the large prison population needs to understand. But as well as that, there needs to be the tools and the pathway for those prisoners who do want to break the cycle of offending. But they just need the support of the government, the establishments they're in. And that's the problem, because I started my sentence at Wandsworth. I then went to HMP Park in Bridgend, and I finished it at HMP Prescoid in Monmouthshire, which is the open prison. But each one has every time you arrive at a different prison, you have to do the same tests on literacy and numeracy and the same B tests, because each establishment wants to do the tick box exercise. But so there's so many obstacles. There are great opportunities, but obviously sometimes there's no true connection to those opportunities for prisoners.
Absolutely. And were you part of the kind of, not hang 'em and flog 'em, but did you have a very different kind of view of prisoners until you went to prison?
I did think to myself, would I make friends there? You know, I had a good group of friends historically, and they all were very supportive of me whilst I was going through what I was going through. Myself and my wife have really great local friends because we relocated down to Penarth when I resigned from my practice. And I was just very honest with everybody. They said, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a struck off solicitor waiting to go to jail, really. But you're right. But there are a lot of people there who you can see they want to change. I worked in education at Park, where we had a good collection of prisoners doing Open University degrees. They had funding from the Prison Education Trust, and it's just whether or not you can keep them interested in that process. Because I found that some of them, if they left prison, they would say, "Well, I'm leaving the books alone," because it was a bird killer whilst they were inside. Yeah. But you need to use it as a tool for rehabilitation as well.
Of course,
so there is disconnects there.
And I guess one of the problems, it's such a big system, 90-odd thousand people in jail, I think it is, or something like that. You know, how do you rehabilitate everybody? And to go back to that kind of perception, that sort of archetypal perception we have of, you know, I've got no interest in rehabilitating people who've done terrible things, all of that. But of course, you kind of, if people are going to come out, then we owe it to the next potential victim, if nothing else, to make sure that that person doesn't commit a horrible crime again. It's in our interest.
Of course it is. As a society, you know, if we want to lower the number in prison, reduce the costs, protect the victims of crime, these are all factors relevant. Yeah. Prior to COVID, my time at Open University was going really well. I was spending more time with my family, and it just accumulates time. And then you have a weekend at home if you live in approved accommodation, which is obviously the essence of the discussion as well. Yeah. But then I was going 5 days a week. I was down at Cardiff University. But then I was also going around the country and speaking about my crime, about professional enablers. But it was the London Bridge attack that led to all, I suppose, extracurricular activities of prisoners in open ground to a halt. The drawbridge comes up because of the seriousness of the offence. I'm not questioning that. But then it leaves a lot of prisoners in limbo during quite a critical time of their sentence, where they, you know, I wouldn't say they earned the right, but they've been good prisoners. They've done what they should have done throughout. They haven't got into trouble, and they got to the stage that they're in open prison. And that is where you start, you know, you work in jobs in the charity shop. You can then get a paid job. You can go to university. You can spend time with your family. So, you know, that's the sort of thing that, you know, the sort of process that is going to be more effective on reducing offending. Yeah.
When you went to jail yourself, Jonny, what sentence were you expecting?
I pleaded guilty. So my barrister said that it wouldn't be over 10 years and I'd have some discount for my guilty plea. So myself and my wife were thinking 7 to 8. But Judge Beddoes at Southwark Crown Court took a very dim view of my involvement. Being the lawyer, I was the gatekeeper. I opened.
I guess your profession, and don't upset Judge Meadows either, by the way. So known for a lengthy sentence. So when they said 12 years, you must have thought the bottom had fallen out the earth.
It did. I was standing in the dock trying to be very composed, and my knees went. And my wife was in the courtroom as well. Wow. With some friends, and yes, it was. It was a tough time because we did appeal it. We just appealed it because a new barrister thought it was excessive. But the appeal court said it was harsh, but it was within guidelines. So they didn't adjust it.
And now
like I said, it gave me the opportunity.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you that in a curious way, Jonny. Was there? I'm sure you wouldn't want to go back and do another 6 years, but is there sort of part of you that thinks you're kind of almost glad of the experience because of where you are today, in a perverse kind of way?
I'd never put my family through the pain of being away. My wife compared it to a bereavement, and my 3 boys were 7, 5, and 2.5. I've got 3 older daughters as well. Yeah. And I wouldn't know. I wouldn't do anything. But having that period, the thing is about reducing sentencing is a great policy, I think. But at the same time, within that reduced sentence, you need to give those offenders the ability to change their pathway. Otherwise, they're just going to be leaving, going back to their hometown, and then into their peer groups and dragged back into
it. I mean, you went back to, you had a family to go back to, and that all stayed together, which is great. But, many people, as we said a second ago, didn't. 18,000 prisoners in unsettled accommodation or sleeping rough or homeless. This is just last year. So with a 50% greater chance of reoffending. So this idea of giving criminals guaranteed accommodation, or former criminals guaranteed accommodation, is that something? 20 million doesn't sound an awful lot in numbers, but is the principle right here? Is that accommodation thing important, do you think?
Well, it is important, and it used to be the case that prisoners would get priority on the housing list. But the main issues I see is the location of the accommodation. A friend of mine left prison just ahead of me, and his home was in Pontypridd. He was a homeowner. He was a professional person. He had a young family, and he was sent up to North Wales for 3 months. Yeah. Wasn't allowed to work and sat in his room in his hostel. So firstly, it's the location. If the location of the housing is going to be in disadvantaged areas, where would that be to the prisoner? I worry about the separation from the family, because it's connection with family members. If a prisoner, I used to speak. I used to act as a listener, which is kind of the prison arm of the Samaritans, and I'd regularly get called out to other prisoners who their girlfriend partner had broken up with them whilst they were away. Perhaps the sentence was too long, perhaps they're constantly reoffending, and the partner had given up on them, quite understandably. But the issue is that if you have those connections, and they're not always there, but if you are placing a prisoner who lives in South Wales in a hostel or a bedsit in North Wales in a building with other people, pretty bored and pretty, disenfranchised, then it is a recipe for disaster. And I know that the MOJ talk about 67%, but is that actually people reoffending, or was that people on recall?
Yeah, true.
There was, on our camp, we'd regularly hear of Joe Bloggs got released to a hostel, and then he was back in Cardiff prison because of a recall, because he turned up. Obviously, he'd been drinking or using drugs, and it was back to square one again for him.
Got it. Jonny, it's been interesting to talk to you. Thank you for coming on with us. I'm sure we will speak again. Jonny Gilbert, a man that found himself in the dock. He's a former solicitor. He was involved in a large banking fraud in 2010. I'm going to say that was probably a multi-million pound fraud, right? It's got to be. You don't get. He got 12 years for that. As Mark says, you don't get that for murder. For a bank fraud, 12 years. Southwark Crown Court. Can you imagine that moment? We sentenced you to 12 years. I bet his Charlies fell off, didn't they? Good Lord. You'd be absolutely 12 years. Served 6 and now trying to make good and put his life back on a different path. Not everybody has that advantage. And there are some people I don't want to release from prison, obviously, and we know who those kind of people are. But if you're going to release somebody, you want to make sure they don't reoffend, right? Is that reasonable?